Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to everyone, regardless of where you are. We are here today to mark and celebrate the International Day of Peace. American Psychological Association Division 48 has been doing this celebration even now traditionally, and this will be like our second panel that we are organizing as a part of that event. Today I'm very, very happy to have members of the Latino European Social Psychological Network with a very nice abbreviation, LaEUMiDI, if I pronounce it well. So here are Dr. Anka Minescu, Dr. Pablo de Tezanos Pinto, and Lisa Oehleschlegel, who will be talking to us about connection between the academia and practitioners, and how that we can make a dialogue between them in order to help refugees currently struggled in Europe and other countries all around the globe. We all know that refugee crisis is one of the biggest concerns currently. And the only thing that we can do as associations, as peace associations, is basically to make their lives easier, or try to make their lives easier in host environments. Before we start, I will just present briefly APA Division 48 and myself. So I am Alma Jeftic. I have a PhD in social psychology, and I'm currently postdoc at the University of Copenhagen and research fellow at the Peace Research Institute, International Christian University in Tokyo. So I live between Europe and Asia, basically. And since January this year, I chair student and early career committee of the APA Division 48, which is division of peace psychology. My major goal there is to connect students at different levels and early career scholars of psychology and neighboring disciplines to talk about peace, to discuss peace, not only in terms of research, but also what can be done in practice to make lives of people easier, all those who are stranded either during the war or any other like circumstances that make their lives harder. Besides that, I also co-founded, last year I co-founded ABRIR, which is the other association that will be that is also hosting and joining, contributing to this panel. And that is the first consortium of psychological researchers from the Global South, where our major goal is actually to connect psychological researchers, either they're working in practice or in academia, from developing countries in the whole world, and to see actually how psychology develops there, what we are doing there, and what can be done actually to connect it and to increase the representation of those underrepresented currently in psychological science. I am free to respond to all your questions on how to join each one of these associations. But before that, I would like to give a floor to my colleagues here from LaEUMiDI network to give us brief presentations of themselves, their incredible work and the network, and especially the ways how we can join and collaborate with them. So the floor is yours, whoever wants to start first.
Hi, everyone. I'll start because I can't help myself from saying that I'm also really happy to join this discussion and to also really, well, celebrate peace when it is there, but also contribute to it when it's not there, right? And I think that as psychologists, we have a real duty towards that because, you know, we are the scientific body then should know about people, and they should know what is good for people and how to, you know, how to work with people to improve their lives, right? And then, of course, in social psychology and cross-cultural psychology, how to take account of people's contexts into defining and supporting their well-being, right? So I'm really grateful, Alma, that we got in touch. I am Anka Minescu. I'm a lecturer in psychology at the University of Limerick on the west coast of Ireland, very close to America, really on the Atlantic edge here. And my colleague Pablo de Tezanos Pinto, he's also a lecturer here in our department. He can talk about himself, where he's coming from, but definitely I'm not Irish, and my name also says that. Yes, so I'm Eastern European, and I was one of those people who had the chance to study in Bucharest, start in my home country, but then continue at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, right? So throughout my education, I also got to already see the differences between the academic environment in Eastern Europe, even before Romania became part of the European Union, for example, right? And also after, and I got a very Western Dutch education all the way to my PhD. And then I came to Ireland, where again, there's a different kind of world and a different kind of status, for example, of social sciences, of psychological sciences. Here in Ireland, people are also very devoted to psychology as a clinical discipline rather than as a social, political, cultural, place where science can also make a difference to the world. So we have a Global Minds master's program. It's an Erasmus Mundus master's program, and this is where Lisa comes in, because Lisa is one of our students on the program. And in this Global Minds program, we basically teach about the cross-cultural psychology of migration, inclusion, and diversity. And it was this program and my own experience and my own trajectory also of kind of being from outside the global north, outside the West, but being educated here and always trying to apply the knowledge I was getting in Holland to Romania, for example. Global Minds was a project that started quite a while ago, but it was really an attempt to raise psychology at a different level, psychology teaching, and also to create a new generation of psychology graduates that come from around the world, so from outside the European Union, to help us understand how psychology can become more relevant to society. So based on the students that came from the global south, majority of them were also from Latin America that were really active, we came up with this new network called LaEUMiDI. And I'll let Pablo describe a little bit about what the network is about, but I think it's very, very important to understand the agency of early career researchers, the agency of already master students like Lisa here, to actually change and contribute to making psychology, the psychological teaching and the psychological research, more relevant to the problems from outside of that global north, where a lot of psychological research and teaching is happening, right? So I think this is where we are at, and especially in LaEUMiDI and also in the Global Minds Masters program, we are also really zooming in these situations of migration and displacement, inclusion and diversity. So this is, I think, what makes our experience relevant to the subdivision, the APA division on peace, right? Peace and conflict, because you cannot have peace without understanding inclusion. So this is, I think, these are the links that we can offer to those people who are interested in how do you make psychology more responsive as a field, more responsive and more engaged in those real world problems, right? So this is, we are here to tell you a little bit about that, but I really want to start by saying that none of this, neither the Global Minds program nor the LaEUMiDI would have happened, and all these changes and all these development in decolonizing psychology without the voice and the experience of those students, of those early career researchers, including myself and all our students, who see that what I read in an academic journal or in a textbook doesn't correspond to my reality from my home country, or to my experience as a migrant or as a refugee, right? And this is where it all comes from. So don't expect change to come from the establishment. No, the establishment doesn't want to change just for the sake of it. The establishment in psychology has to also be challenged by these newcomers to it, by the people who don't feel they're represented. And that's more or less what we're trying to do at the kind of meta level. But I'll pass it on to Pablo to tell us about LaEUMiDI more. Just so that by means of introduction.
Yeah, I think Lisa had prepared like a general introduction to LaEUMiDI, but I'll no? Okay. You're saying, Lisa, did you or no?
I can, but you can also just go ahead. That's fine.
No, but I don't want to take that away from you. So I can introduce myself though. I do. So I come originally from Chile, and I studied there and I worked there for about 10 years after I did my PhD in the UK. Yeah, I was thinking about this kind of integration or kind of collaboration and possible or on the other side, kind of separation and distancing of academia and practitioners. And I think there is, I mean, in Chile in particular, I think it's interesting, and I think that's the case in many Latin American universities, that when I was doing my undergrad, this was at during the 2000s, early 2000s, the university I was studying in, which was Universidad Católica, which is one of the more prestigious universities in Chile, was kind of transitioning from having faculty that was kind of that did plenty of applied work and basically wrote books and was kind of more theoretical, I would say, into more kind of just what we consider now kind of more traditional kind of empirical research, right? Publishing many papers and so forth. And I think kind of there is something to be gained with doing that, but we also kind of lost something in the sense that there is there has been like a process of greater specialization where those of us who are focusing on academia can really be disconnected from the actual experience of those who are in more applied contexts. On the other hand, I feel that since there, even since I did my PhD 10 years ago, that has improved in the sense that I see more and more kind of people who are in academia, but also collaborating and doing more kind of applied projects, even if they are kind of based on collaboration, right? Which I think is kind of the key thing. And it's also what we're trying to encourage with LaEUMiDI. And also, again, this is why I like being in UL so much. Not to put down UL, I think it's a fantastic university, but it's not kind of one of the more fancy universities in the world, right? And I think that's a great thing because it is in these kinds of kind of comparatively less prestigious universities where you have people who can kind of are allowed to or can kind of do more of these things that involve more time, more kind of personal involvement with projects and so forth, that and still have an academic career, basically, right? So I think it is in these kind of universities where there are many kind of interesting things happening. So yeah, I think even though there's always like an historical kind of back and forth between kind of a research or academia and application, I think we're in a good kind of moment historically, let's say, or at least that's what I see kind of from my kind of vantage point. Of course, in different places, the experience might be different. And yeah, and LaEUMiDI, this is only the second year kind of proper that we've been doing the network, and it's been a fantastic experience, precisely just in highlighting and bringing it to the fore kind of these collaborative projects, right? And I think there is so much interest in it, and in that we're very much aligned with the project in ABRIR, right? And we had a meeting with Alma, and we feel that we're kind of yeah, we're going in the same direction, right? So again, that brings to this feeling that it's more positive, right? Yeah, that's enough for me. I think at least I think maybe we should do like a proper introduction to the network.
Wonderful. Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Alma, for having me as well. I have an academic background in psychology and peace and conflict studies, and now, as Anka mentioned, I'm back at uni in another master's program that focuses on the psychology of migration, inclusion, and diversity. So I've been moving in and out of academia and working in Central America for more than 4 years in different regional projects. So yeah, I think one of, finding these bridges between practitioners and academic research has been one of the principal motivators for me to go back into a master's program that is also, that kind of responds to that need, right? To find better ways to respond to the issues that that are out there, right? And that practitioners are facing. And that is why I'm also very proud and very happy to be part of LaEUMiDi, because I realized working in Central America how privileged it is to speak several languages. And because you can then actually, you can read and you can listen and you can exchange and reflect with people from different places and also get to know different concepts and theories and all that. But I also noticed that it can actually reinforce a lot of power imbalances, because if I'm the person then, kind of going back to Germany, that's where I'm from, and then talking about the project we're doing and the approaches we're having, then I look like as if I'm the expert, right? And actually the knowledge doesn't come from me, but it comes from other people. And it's just because of that language barrier, then there's this huge imbalance and unfair privilege, which feels very uncomfortable and is not good, because I don't think then we're actually speaking, and expertise is actually shared from whom it should be shared and who actually has it. So yes, let me share the screen, because I think this will make it a little bit easier. So this should be working. Can you see the presentation now in full mode? Yeah.
Cargando. You even have the computer in Spanish. Nice one. Okay, it's there now. It's there now. It's there now.
Wonderful. So yeah, as already mentioned, now let me just check. Sorry, give me 1 second, because I'm not sure this is correct. Let me see. Hold on, I'm not sharing the correct one, so sorry. So let's try again.
I'm actually really glad while you sort that out, I can maybe ask also Alma how they manage this, because for us, this privilege of speaking multiple languages, the list I was mentioning, and of also the kind of monopoly of English and English publications and English everything, kind of, that is kind of, running the psychological field. I think these are really also important obstacles in science as much as in practice, right? Because the language, we should not forget that language itself and all languages or the hierarchy of languages make such a create a real difficulty, right, in what we are trying to achieve. I think also you in ABRIR, in APA, and also in our program and in LaEUMiDi, because it somehow always comes down to proficiency in English, which is again something that we should really be aware of, right?
Yeah, I'm just so glad that I have colleagues at ABRIR who are actually from Latin America, various countries, and then from India, Nepal, then Eastern Europe. They bring like this variety of languages too. So basically, if we have some emails coming from those countries, people asking about ABRIR, wanting to join or having some problems, wanting us to help them, like I always can direct those emails to people who speak these languages, and that is like a perfect thing that has happened.
Brilliant.
Right.
Back to you, Lisa.
Wonderful, thanks. So as mentioned, right, the Latino-European Social Psychological Research Network, focused on migration, displacement, and inclusion, is an initiative that has just started, but has had, I think, already an amazing impact. And as I joined it like a couple of months ago, so not too long, but there's so much interest and so much interest in finding these bridges and finding ways to connect. Which is exactly what the network was set up for, right? It is hosted by the Diversity and Migration Research Lab at University of Limerick, and it connects Latin American, European-based experts. But actually, we've also seen that many experts from Latin America, from Europe, are now elsewhere, and they are still, also bringing in different perspectives, which are very helpful as well. So it's not exclusively focused on these continents. The network itself focuses on psychological research that contributes to enhancing the social inclusion and well-being of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, seeks to bridge academic researchers and practitioners who work with these groups and topics, and translates relevant research between continents across Portuguese, Spanish, and English. We have more than 200 professionals, and this number is growing because these days several people are joining. But as you can see, from all over the world, not only Latin America and Europe. here is our fantastic management team that, as you can see as well, is from several countries and has different backgrounds, different work experiences, different research experiences, which has, I think, helped a lot to organize spaces that work for a lot of different people. And looking back last year, the network organized a fantastic conference on the psychological science and practice around migration, displacement, and inclusion. And this year, we're just about to host another international forum, which will be implemented next week. So you're still on time to register and join us, where we will focus even more, right, on these best practices in fieldwork and research with migrants and refugees, and what best practices there are in bridging them. Just a bit up. Finally, just to mention a couple of activities, like what do networks do? They're just to say, it's not just this conference once a year, which are obviously big events, but also there are developing collaborations from this network, right? Like speaking and seeing different ways of working together on topics such as the work plan between the Regional Council of Psychology, Commission on Migration, Refugees, Trafficking of Persons and Subjectivities, and LaEUMiDI. We have regular co-supervision meetings in the sense of psychologists who are working in different parts of the world meeting online and supporting each other with different cases or other general questions. And we have also been starting to develop different products, right, that where a need has been identified concerning, in this case, mental health, helping the helpers, right, of the people, so mental health of the people who provide counseling or other type of psychosocial support for migrants, refugees, and other vulnerable groups. And I think just to why we were talking so much about language, and I think this is really unique of LaEUMiDi, is that every meeting, every forum, every conference is translated simultaneously. There's a simultaneous interpretation, English, Spanish, Portuguese. So at least this is not a barrier anymore to understanding each other or understanding us, which is massive because there's still so much that has been developed, right, in each space and line of thought that we are often not familiar with. So yeah, just to get in touch with us, contact us, and let us know. We're always open for more members and more perspectives and more insights. But I would leave it here and
thank you so much, Lisa. And I suppose that the availability of the languages of the interpreters for Spanish and Portuguese is really the Latino part in the LaEUMiDi, right? So it is the reason why we want to keep it kind of Latino focused for now, in terms of we can translate literally the language from researchers and practitioners who work with displacement and migrants in Latin American countries or in countries where Portuguese and Spanish is spoken, right? So that of course Central America included, right? But I want to emphasize what Lisa said, that actually what we have in LaEUMiDi is researchers from all over the world who are interested in displacement and are interested to learn. And it's just that we don't do the translation in that language. So for example, the last year, especially the Helper project came about because of the Ukrainian refugees that basically spread all across Europe, right? And we were really interested to hear from the practitioners that are working with including and supporting Ukrainian refugees. So if you think about it, okay, then we should have had the Ukrainian or Russian translation, but that was not the point, right? The point was that what can we learn from Spanish and Portuguese speakers, right, that is not already translated in English, that we can't already access, that would then contribute and support also the Ukrainian refugee crisis, because it is really a crisis, and not to dramatize what happens, but it is a big shock, right? I mean, in Ireland, for example, we would normally have not even 7,000 asylum seekers per year. Ireland is a small country, 5 million people. So 7,000 people would apply for asylum on a yearly basis, 7,000. In the first year of the Ukrainian war, so last year, we had 70,000 Ukrainians coming to Ireland, right? So for all systems in the country, for all services that deal with refugees, this was a crisis, this was a shock, because, you know, you now have to find housing, schools, medical supports, language supports for 70,000 people, right? So in that sense, you know, our LaEUMiDI network was activated because we were already dealing with displacement, right? And now it was a matter, okay, so what can we do to support the people who are, for example, now working with the Ukrainian refugees? And these infographics came like that, you know, because we discovered that a lot of people who are like teachers, for example, teachers, you know, come to school and they discover, oh, today we have 10 new Ukrainian kids in class. Yeah, where do you start? How do you, especially since the kids also wouldn't have the language skills to actually just join an Irish or an English classroom, right? So we were thinking of, you know, what can we give from psychological science to these teachers to really support their everyday life, right? I mean, for example, give them a heads up that it is possible that they can get secondary traumatized by the stories or by engaging with the kids and with their experiences of how did they manage to get to Ireland, right? So we gave them an infographic. We designed the infographic on, okay, this is how secondary traumatic stress looks like, right? Because a lot of what we take for granted in psychological science is just really not known by people outside of psychology, right? And also what we found is that, for example, even just a little bit of cultural knowledge about the group that you have to work with makes a big difference to people, right? So knowing that some of the Ukrainian kids might speak Russian can be helpful, because in Ireland we had other Russian-speaking minority groups until now, right? So then the school can actually facilitate, you know, maybe some friendships or some relationships between kids who speak Russian because they come from Lithuania, Estonia, or even Poland, right? You know, who are just Russian speakers because they speak Russian where they come from, right? And this new Ukrainian refugees. So I think this is kind of what we already saw, that even if the network is very much an exchange between Portuguese, Spanish, English kind of speaking worlds, that we can actually have an impact in other cultural contexts or you know, ethnic contexts, because it is knowing what you need to know, right? So that's kind of the idea. So Alma, I can tell them what we want to talk about. We have half an hour left, unless there are any questions right now. I can share my screen, and I can say that we actually have a plan beyond you know, making you know, beyond becoming familiar with each other. We had a plan of being very concrete about the learnings that Alma also in her research and her network, as well as all of us in the current and past lives, like especially Lisa's past life of working in Latin America and working with, you know, development and peace promotion and so on. How would we structure this conversation, right? So hold on, I don't know if you're seeing this. This shouldn't be there. Close. Yeah, is this okay now? Can you see my screen? Okay, so we kind of wanted to address 3 points. Okay, so hopefully we'll get to all the 3. The first one is, what is it from psychological research that actually matters when we work with refugees, or when anybody else works with refugees and we as psychologists want to support them? So that would be kind of the first point, you know, can psychology contribute in particular to the refugee or to this kind of journey between war-torn countries and peaceful countries, or in the journey within one country that, you know, moves out of war and peace doesn't come the second day, right? So like these are all very big transitions for people to move from one place to the other, but also for political systems and societies to move from conflict to peace, right? The second point is, can we think of ways to really engage with those vulnerable communities and the service providers working with them to actually align psychological research more to those needs, the needs that are right now, right there outside of the university, rather than continue to develop an academic career in a well-established field with a well-established theory and just move along as if nothing is happening in the world. While again, I want to reiterate, I strongly feel that psychology has a duty to actually help the social crisis, this kind of massive, human damage that is created by political conflicts, right? So, how can we align? How can we know, what to research more, or how to, bring our research to people who need it out there? So I call this alignment of research agendas. And Lisa had a very important point when we were preparing for this, because practitioners are doing research all the time. In the scientific world, you would call that ethnographic research, right? or participant observation, right? But they are all the time collecting data from every case, from every situation they work with. It's just that because they are not academics, they don't do it with ethics approval and with surveys and I don't know what procedures we have. Of course, it's not considered research, but they have a huge amount of knowledge in the practitioner world, right? And to us is very much about hearing about that. Where do you even go to ask a psychologist that does counseling to refugees of any age, of any background, whatever, to actually ask that psychologist, tell me about your caseload, tell me the things that are worrying these kids, right? Because if you're a clinical psychologist, that's all you do. You have cases. You don't do the research, right? And we as researchers should find out what they are confronted with, and the other way around, right? What is new in the research world that would help me now in my caseload? So this, the alignment is the second point. And I suppose the third point is to maybe, highlight, and maybe we've already done this for the first half an hour, highlight how, when you are busy with the psychological study around peace and migration, and you become networked to other people who are doing this, these networks are a way. So ABRIR, LaEUMiDI, these networks are a way of actually taking psychology from the textbooks and bringing it into the real world, right? It's very hard to do that as an individual, as a solo kind of, I'm just go and do a, save the world on my own kind of thing, right? It is very necessary to have these in-betweeners, these in-between networks or organizations or spaces, right, where this alignment can happen and where we can do this translation of our work. Okay. So these are the 3 points that we want to go through, and I here again I don't need to put this to keep this slide up either. It just as a kind of heads up for our own discussion of what might we tell the world about what are our experiences in kind of what kind of psychology do people need, right? What do all those service providers, all those frontline workers, all the people who work in their everyday life with refugees and vulnerable communities, what do they need to know from psychology? And from my own personal experience, I can tell you that we have been running this outreach project called Sanctuary with Psychology. So LaEUMiDI is part of that, a bigger attempt. And we were invited to basically run psychosocial sessions with the newly arrived Iraqi and Syrian refugees in 2017. So in 2017, in our little Limerick city here, we were having 17 families basically brought into Limerick from camps. And the NGO that deals with their resettlement asked us as a psychology department, can you do something to support these people on a kind of social level? So this is how we first started. And we basically started with having this kind of Saturday living room in the city center kind of sessions where a lot of psychology, my group of people, researchers, younger, older, from different countries, international students, but all psychologically trained, were sitting there drinking coffee and tea and doing arts and crafts with the families. Okay, so it was a very safe place. We had no agenda, just a place to meet and greet and do arts and crafts, right? And it's easy because there were a lot of kids. So kids like to stick things, cut things, do this kind of, messy business of painting and coloring or whatever. So, it was presented as a relaxing activity to do on a Saturday in the city center with all the psychologists, right? So this is where we started in 2017. And what I discovered already there is that people who we were trying to involve to create this setting, the living room in the city, had just no understanding of what the refugee journey is, right? So zero psychological understanding of what does it mean to basically leave everything behind, or actually having lost everything, right? You've lost everything you had. Your house might have been bombed. Half of your family is dead. You only really have your suitcase, right? I mean, this is really hard to imagine for people who have not worked with refugees before, just the journey, and the fact that this journey was also complicated by a period of waiting in a refugee camp before you would know what your home, what your new home looks like, what your destination is. And, we were learning from the refugees that they thought that they were going to Germany, but they ended up in Ireland, right? So there's so much going on for people who are being displaced that all these other people around in Limerick, at least, they had no idea. Why would I know about that, right? So this was the first element of psychoeducation. So education about the psychological journey of a refugee that we discovered we needed to do. The second type of training and learning we discovered was really needed was intercultural sensitivity. So just kind of in Ireland, there's a huge tradition of charity. Ireland is a very Catholic country, and Catholics are very charitable. So there was a lot to kind of really work with this mindset of I'm helping by charity. I'm superior. I have everything, and I'm giving stuff to these people who have nothing, right? So we really needed to challenge that in intercultural training by saying, no, there is no superiority between people. These power dynamics will actually really prohibit you to be nice and to engage with the refugee guys that are coming here on Saturday, right? On Saturday, we are all equal. Not that you are better or worse, not that, yeah, you are better because you're not a refugee, but that doesn't mean that you have to look down on people who don't have your legal status, right? So we need to do a lot of work in terms of power relationships. We actually made the word help prohibited in the project, right? Nobody was allowed to use the word help, right? We moved to support, right? Because help is so asymmetric. So from top to down, we moved to the concept of support. I give you something, you give me something. And of course, like in any other volunteer or typical situation like this, all our volunteers ended up, at the end of the project saying that they learned more and that they got more from the experience than what they gave, right? So you come to these situations as a volunteer thinking that you're giving your time, you're giving everything, and you end up realizing that you're earning so much more. Yeah, you become more human ultimately at the end of it, right? So those are just kind of examples of where we started and the kind of psychoeducation we thought was really, really relevant. And closer now, also when we started to work with the Ukrainian refugees, we also started to delve a bit deeper into this idea of trauma. Regular people who are not psychologists know very little about trauma. They don't know what that is. They don't know how it is that somebody's whole, sense of meaning in life is smashed, right? That everything and every single way that you imagined your life to be and that your life has been to this point is gone with a bomb, or in a flash is gone because something in that war or the forced displacement that you had to go through has basically disturbed every single thing that you thought was certain, right? So even that aspect of trauma, of people who have survived traumatic events, are just not on people's radar. They don't know how is it that psychologically these people still manage to survive, to overcome, how many of them end up in post-traumatic stress disorder and so on. So we found that is also a very important kind of element that psychologists should educate everybody outside of the academia, when working with these populations, right? And Alma, I don't know if you maybe want to talk a bit of your experience with this. I can take this down for that.
Yeah, so I can either stay or whatever. I just wanted to add something like related to here we are talking about like refugees in Ireland, which is like a developed country. What we are also doing through us at ABRIR are also very concerned about position of refugees who end up in developing countries. For instance, we have refugees and migrants currently stranded in Bosnia and in Serbia. Both of these are actually very much developing countries. They belong to the global south, and very often they don't really have their own resources and means to deal with the refugees and migrants. But people are simply stranded there. They're trying to enter EU, they cannot do it. So basically, it is like a bounce back effect. They're trying to go, then they return them, then they're stuck with us, or they can go back to their countries. I also have a colleague who is currently been engaged into research of position of refugees in slums in New Delhi. So she's working on position of Rohingya refugees in New Delhi in India. And that's what very, very touchy research that she's been doing through this psychological and anthropological lenses. But what I was mostly concerned about when I even started this was the fact that I'm Bosnian war survivor, but I was somehow, let's say, privileged that I wasn't forced to leave my city. So I could stay in my city, which was, if something like that exists, like that word, it was like a bit less affected than the rest of the Bosnia. So we accepted many refugees from other parts of the country. And I remember I was in elementary school, that one part of the elementary school was closed for classes because people were living there. Basically, they were living in classrooms because the country was in war. Those were all our people, and we didn't have any means or anywhere else to put them but to the school classrooms. And all the time throughout my research, I was somehow trying to explore these phenomena that I went through. And what I'm like concerned with in Bosnia, particularly now, is whether basically that what Johanna Wolf has said, altruism born of suffering exists. Whether we can like somehow raise the awareness of the people that they used to be refugees either in their own country or elsewhere in European Union or in the US, Canada, and then they came back and now they're faced with those people who are in more or less similar conditions that they were, whether they are more ready to help due to the struggle that they have survived or not, and what are the factors that are influencing, and how we can basically like raise their awareness to help and to assist people in need. We are also dealing with a huge like fight for resources, because when you are in developing country, it is always like we don't have enough for our people. How can we like help somebody else who is not even from here? So how to challenge those narratives, how to like wake people up and tell them like that basically, you know, even a small help is still help. It is not that you need to provide like immediately jobs and high salaries, which we also don't have there, but it is also like about providing them maybe like just not that hostile environment, but providing them environments where they can feel safe and where they can feel as a human beings. And what I just want to say before Anka continues is that parallel to this event today, we have also kicked off the series called Science Beyond Data, and those are like video stories of peace researchers who are also war survivors, where they're telling a bit about their research. You will see most of them are PhD students or MA students at the moment, and they're also researching phenomena they have either had experienced earlier or they have been going through now. And they're giving us these very touching narratives of how it actually started, how their interest developed, and why they're that much into that research, and how it affects them. So the question of vicarious trauma is happening there. So it's all available on APA Division 48 YouTube channel. I will add it to the chat here, and you may like watch it and see. We are currently having narratives from participants from Bosnia, Kosovo, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. And we are preparing new from Nepal and Rwanda. So like it is also something to take into consideration how us who have been affected by war actually are experiencing and going through the research that is also like somehow reminding us of the trauma that we have survived. And whether or not we are like basically even more eager to help and to assist, even not only as academics, but also as practitioners through that. So like Anka, I will let you continue now.
Yeah, no, this and actually, by the way, this moves us very swiftly into the next point, and I'm really grateful for this clarification, right? That actually displacement can also happen internally, and that all of this stuff that I was also talking about also affects people who just move cities, or you know, from the countryside to the village, or from the village to the city, right? In times of war. So I think that this is really important to remember, that displacement of any kind, whether it's internal to a country or whether you go outside of the country, has very similar effects, but it could probably be much more easy to kind of ignore the internal displacement people, because you're thinking, well, they're not changing their food, they're not changing their culture, they're not changing their language, right? So surely to God, you know, it cannot be that hard, you know, you stay in your own country. But actually it is very traumatic, right? Because you're still disrupting and interrupting all the social, economic, cultural relationships that these people had, even if you move 50 kilometers away, right? Never mind that, but also the idea of displacement is that there is no going back. So that is very common, right? Whether it's internal displacement or international migration, because the point is that you can never go back because there is no going back, right? In times of war like that. So I think that there are some things that we have really a duty to shout out about, you know, that displacement is very traumatic, no matter where it is, and kind of try to test and burst the myths, right? That if you at least can keep the same language, or that you at least can keep the same country and food, or it might be still easy, right? Because you're living in a school or you're living in a hotel. That is displacement, internal displacement, but that still means that you have not your own home anymore, and you will never have your own home anymore, right? So I think those are really, really serious things. And the other thing that I want to pick up on is where you said that, you know, in developing countries there are also maybe less resources, or that, you know, there's, you know, the zero-sum game of, you know, we only have so much, who do we give it to? If we give it to you, we don't give it to our own people. I think that's also really much resonating sometimes even here in Ireland, because here there's a housing crisis, for example, even for local Irish people. And you can imagine this influx of 70,000 Ukrainian refugees, how it amplified this housing crisis. Also because a lot of these refugees ended up being put in hotels. And actually, Ireland's only economic, you know, area is tourism. So Ireland makes its national money from tourism, and that was now basically reduced because, you know, hotels had to host refugees instead of, you know, open up for American tourists that are, you know, a huge source of income nationally, right? So even within this kind of developed or less developed countries, there are these power dynamics, right? And there are these local issues of resources that, of course, newcomers will always raise. And I have actually no solution to that, but I think there are the things that are in the media a lot, in the dramatizing of the media, of the, oh my God, refugees, or, you know, whatever, but they are not in psychological study. I mean, we should be able to do a little bit more. I mean, we have, for example, perceived threat theory. I mean, it's as big a theory as you can imagine, but how can we actually decrease that threat? We don't do as much about that. We prove over and over that if we perceive the refugees as a threat, you're more prejudiced. Okay, so what's the other side? What can we do to counter that, you know? And I think that there we also can have a little bit more dialogue with those people, like the hotel owners, or the, you know, the people who are at the front line, you know, who also start to believe in these myths, right? Because they see their business going down or whatever, right? So I think this is where, you know, the second point that we wanted to talk about, and I think Lisa has some really good points here from her experience before, you know, is this alignment and this hearing of what actually matters for the practitioners, right? Now, I don't know what I'm sharing. Do you see does this screen with the, yeah, okay. So I don't know, Lisa, you said something, you know, about this kind of the invisibility of some of the practitioner work, right? And whether maybe psychological science and us, you know, young, old, and at whatever stage, you know, can support those practitioners to kind of give them more, you know, to legitimize almost, or to add weight to what they already know is true, right? So to what they already know from practice, but they do not have this kind of solid scientific proof for. So I don't know if you want to give an example of that. I mean, you are talking there about peace, integration, mental health. Like, obviously, these are areas that you worked in, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the biggest potentials that I saw. I think that can be easily done. I mean, I remember one good practice, but I wasn't directly involved, was, you know, how to work with the private sector to prevent gender violence or gender-based violence. And I mean, companies weren't really interested. I think, if I'm not completely mistaken, this was in Peru and Ecuador where they started this initiative. And with bringing in researchers, and, you know, as researchers, you think in these boxes, okay, what do I want to know? How can I get there? What surveys do I need? Do I need control groups and all of that? So they started a piece of research to see the costs, to analyze the costs of gender-based violence for companies, how much they lose in productivity. And this was a complete game changer, right? All of a sudden, companies are like, oh my God, I'm losing millions every year. because of gender-based violence, of course we have to do something against it, right? So this was one example that I thought was really, yeah, it really struck me that, you know, sometimes we need other methods to start talking to different actors. And in my personal experiences in the project that I worked in, we developed a training for psychosocial service providers. And as practitioners, you don't have half a year to develop a questionnaire, so you do it quite quickly. And you just want to see, does the training work? Does it have an impact in the people that are participating? And afterwards, we brought in a researcher to understand a bit better what are we actually measuring with this questionnaire, which was also very, very helpful. But then after a while, you know, we knew that, well, it's great that service providers, psychologists, social workers are doing a better job. They perceive they are doing a better job. But what we actually want to get at is the children and young people and families who, you know, who seek counseling actually also have received this impact, right? And benefit from the indirect impact of the training that we did with these providers. And this is much more complicated. We didn't even know who are they actually attending. Like, we didn't know these families, we didn't know these children. We weren't in contact with them because it was not kind of part of the project. So, and then it was like, oh, this is getting too complex. Got in an amazing university, and as I said, right, it was very easy for them. Oh, okay, let's think about the research design. We need the control groups. Let's think what variables we can control. And as a practitioner, you're completely out of this world, right? So, and in the end, we got this result, right? They found they could show, you know, we had an article in there with evidence somehow that the children and young people who were attended to by the psychosocial service providers who had participated in the training had a higher increase in mental health and well-being compared to children and young people who had been attended to by a psychologist or social worker who had not participated in the training. And this is massive, right? You can actually see the training has had an impact in the well-being of young people. And having this evidence is just so important because it's so hard to sell mental health or well-being. You know, how do you show it to the world? You can't touch it. It's not tangible at all. And it's even hard to, you know, to show in a photo or anything. So it's important to show your impact, right? Also to organizations who will give you the funding. So these kind of, to show these impacts is really important. And at the same time, what you mentioned before, Anka, that, you know, that practitioners do research all the time, this finding wasn't really surprising for us. We knew it worked because we had been talking to people, the team had been accompanying these participants, but we didn't have kind of the evidence, right? So I think this is a massive potential where academic researchers can really give added value.
Yeah, and I got that feedback also from here, a local NGO called DORAS. So like it's in Irish, it means doors, you know, the doors into Ireland. You know, this NGO does this, you know, the kind of advocacy and migrant support, you know, and they also told us, you know, like we see that we are kind of reinventing the wheel every time because we do not have the research to tell the council we actually need a permanent member of staff, right? So they're trying to apply for a psychosocial guy every year or every so often because they don't have the evidence that if they had that person in their job, you know, in a permanent job in the NGO, all their services would be better received and better provided, right? And again, for an academic, this is a kind of relatively easy pre and post evaluate something piece of research, right? But again, it's like, who is willing to do that kind of research? Because that kind of research might not necessarily be published in a, I don't know what journal, right? Or it would take maybe a year or 2 years, which is the longer than, you know, a bachelor or master thesis. So then do you have a student who does a PhD thesis on this and would incorporate, right? So it's about aligning all these politics and dynamics about what an organization needs in order to provide better services or to have the evidence that this is better with the psychoeducation than without, right? As opposed to just basically we do our own thing, they do their own thing, right? And I think this, for me, this is also where LaEUMiDI comes in. And I don't know if Pablo, do you want to comment just very briefly, because obviously we're running out of time about,
yeah, sure,
about the interpretation part,
so,
you know, because and this
yeah, but
wait,
but before that, I also did want to say that the look, I kind of feel that sometimes the issue is that nobody really has time to write things down, right? Not even researchers in a way, right? We're always in academia, kind of between the teaching and doing the papers and so on. And so do practitioners that they're all the time kind of actually performing, right, the interventions and working on it. And there is the matter of, okay, let's do empirical research to kind of validate an intervention and so on. But even, and again, this is what I feel is increasingly there's a place for it, doing a paper that simply describes the intervention and explains the experience and so forth is something that typically practitioners don't have either the time or even motivation to do. But I believe is so important because this is kind of how we learn from each other, right? And even before there were research papers, kind of people wrote, I don't know, like treatises in the Middle Ages, right? And this is kind of in written form, or at least say this is also what happens in academia, that at least in a conference you get to see other people research and talk with them and so forth. And again, stuff like LaEUMiDI provides a conference venue, right, where we do have this interaction and learning from each other. And there is a lot that academia, kind of research in psychology, can learn from what practitioners are doing and are learning kind of in their own work, right? Sometimes there is a theory that immediately when you try to apply it, that kind of doesn't survive because it is obvious for someone who's applying it, but it's not obvious for someone who's kind of more disconnected, right? So like you were saying with working with refugees, that this is not like a helping relationship. I also feel, and this is kind of as you have there in the PowerPoint very well, the arrows go both ways. And psychology as a discipline has so much to learn kind of from this interaction between the application and theory and research and so forth. And that's kind of, yeah, to connect it to translation. This is and we kind of like this, using this translation in the both senses, right? And the other sense, look, so it's been a fantastic experience to work in LaEUMiDI in the issue that basically, because we have the thing in Zoom, which is the only way such a multinational, international kind of network could work. This gives us the opportunity to do simultaneous interpretation kind of with volunteers, right? Where they basically, the way it looks, if you're if you're a participant there, is that you can select the language you want to hear, right? So someone is presenting in Portuguese and you're hearing the English channel, and therefore you listen in English, even though the person is speaking in Portuguese. So a couple of things. One is, I mean, for me, it's been very notable kind of what difference it makes, especially for someone. Sometimes we've had presentation who maybe could have presented in English, but it was way better to listen to them kind of present in Portuguese because it's a native language and because they speak kind of more animatedly and more kind of confidently, right, than in a language they're less familiar with. In academia, in general, we're more used. We kind of have to kind of eventually learn English in most kind of, again, contexts. But there are many, again, practitioners in Latin America who have no reason to kind of work so hard in learning English. And having this kind of possibility to do simultaneous interpretation kind of opens a door there kind of to interact better, right? And the other thing I wanted to say regarding that is that there is this as an obvious application is obviously an issue when working with refugees, right? And this is not kind of directly what we're doing in LaEUMiDI, but I think one of the things I'm thinking kind of ahead, right, is how we use this experience that it turns out is not so difficult to have volunteers who know both languages to be kind of trained to do simultaneous interpretation, right? And with refugees, it's always an issue, and that's another case where even though some people do this professionally, this kind of interpretation, there's just not enough money for it, or the governments are not willing to put enough money for it. So having that opportunity and kind of developing kind of a framework where you have people kind of who can do language interpretation is fantastic, and that's also connected to technology. And maybe you, Anka, I know you have some experience with that in the sense that it is kind of increasingly easy, right? So in terms of just using Google Translate on the phone is something that is being kind of more and more used, and again, it has opened opportunities for communication that it was. I mean, it is such a big barrier, right? When people just don't speak the language. With dealing with the government institutions when you're a refugee, and also dealing with the volunteers and so forth. So yeah, I'm not sure we're kind of running out of time, but I would love to hear you, Anka, to kind of about that experience that you had, which is not in the context of LaEUMiDI, but in the context with working with refugees, right? You also have this issue of translation, right? And I think it's something that again, I'm optimistic about, because I think it's improving, and it's knowledge kind of, or know-how that is worth kind of increasing, right, and kind of developing.
And look, this is where, I mean, my final maybe message also, because I'm aware of the time running out, is that, you know, if you manage to have inclusion in education and research, you actually can have inclusion in the real world and in the outreach that you do. Because for us, all of this is possible because of the Global Minds Masters program, where the European Union, through Erasmus Mundus, are giving grants to non-European students who are non-native speakers of English, right? Who bring that diversity. So this internationalization, right? This bringing of the diversity, bringing this representation, like Alma saying in ABRIR, right, into the research and into the field, into the university, right, then allows you to do other things that you would never do. So in all my work, for example, with the Ukrainian refugees last year, we actually worked through one of the former Global Mind students, who is now my PhD student, Liliana Mbeve, who is from Belarus and could do the translation through Russian. But now, of course, now we cannot do the translation through Russian anymore because of the sensitivities, right? But the thing is, at the beginning, there was nothing else. So there was something, right? And the whole of Ireland was using much more Russian translation than the Ukrainian, because there was just not enough Ukrainian translators in the country, right? But here you see how, you know, having an international student already here, a psychologist already trained in cultural sensitivities and trauma, because this is what we do in the program, you know, could make this happen, that we provide psychosocial support to probably about 200 250 people living in the region of Limerick, right, over the course of a year, right? And the psychoeducation of the service providers, who of course could be done in English, but without the kind of legitimacy of, well, Liliana knows, she's from Belarus, I know I'm from Romania, and I did my PhD on Russia, right? So all of that was so much more credible by our own nationality and personal experience, but also by the weight of our academic education, right? And we were a lecturer, a PhD student, and people listen to us, right? So I think this is where we can use the power of psychology in a good way, right? I mean, yes, we do have that power. We do have the power of our expertise, and sometimes through our networks and our students, we have the power of those multiple languages and you know, multiple backgrounds and multiple wisdom, you know, and this is what I also feel really strongly about, this decolonization of how we teach and what we teach, you know, because we have to create these spaces where the students are telling us, nothing you just told me makes sense in my country, right? And then we know, okay, then you come and tell me what would make sense in your country, or what should we talk about more, you know? And sometimes that's all it takes, you know. It takes to have that opening and that question, right? And in terms of the technology, Pablo, I mean, again, I can tell you just that for Ukrainians themselves and for the service providers in this time, right, it made a huge difference, you know, because they are all using their phones. And that was actually not even the case in 2017 with the Syrian people. For some reason, those Syrian families were less technology users, or were using less Google Translate for any of their interactions than the Ukrainians do. And that was massive, you know, even for teachers in school. It has been the help of technology and the ability of the Ukrainian kind of, people that came here that I've heard of to engage with that has actually made a massive difference to them as well, you know. And again, what do we do in research? to do that, right? I mean, in research, you typically have a survey in English, and then you translate it, back translate all this process in whatever local language. But are we taking that translation serious enough? You know, where is that kind of cultural interpretation happening? And this is where cross-cultural psychology, of course, has a lot to offer, you know, in terms of the validity of those concepts, or, you know, the fact that translation is different than interpretation, and that you have to take into account cultural knowledge for any translation to happen, and therefore also for any cross-cultural research to happen, right? And I doubt that we are taking that seriously as well, right? So again, if you bring the researchers from those areas, and if they are engaged, not just with translating the questionnaire, but when really thinking through the concepts that you're trying to measure, the reality of people and whatever, right? Then it's possible. Then inclusion is possible, right? I mean, it just changes the whole kind of arrogance of, well, I'm a professor in psychology, I know what to do, just apply the hammer because everything is a nail, right? Because that's all you know. So, okay, I think we probably said enough from our side. So I wonder, Alma, if there's anything else you want to record, you know, or to address. I feel like I could talk again for another hour.
I think that like we definitely have a topic that we can discuss for an hour, but I know that most of you are very busy with other obligations, so I don't want to keep you longer. And we can for sure have this like these events occasionally through APA Division 48, because that is always a space, like a safe space, to talk about topics like this. And also we can do something for sure with ABRIR. In terms of like when we're talking about these languages and translations, last year we had our first symposium, and it was actually translated. We actually had subtitles for all sessions that we have. And this summer we were awarded a special commendation by Society for the Improvement of Psychological Science, especially for that project. But I mean, I'm always saying, like, as academics, we are always thinking of, okay, what is the impact factor of the journal? Can I publish it in that journal? What are you gonna do with this research? I mean, ABRIR was also founded because we wanted to deal with and to increase replicability and generalizability in psychological science. But from the other point, although it has this strong academic stream, we have this component where we actually want to open, what ABRIR means in Spanish, to open psychological science to all those underrepresented, to understand how psychology is being taught in India, in Latin America, in Nepal, in Bosnia, in Serbia, in Montenegro, in all of these countries that are currently totally underrepresented in mainstream psychology. And what I usually like to say that even topics like this that we discuss occasionally, we should always think about this like human component and practitioners component, because at the moment all of us are maybe even not that aware of how privileged we are, that we are sitting either in our offices or our home. We have food and shelter and we can discuss these topics. But what about people who are outside and who cannot even like understand what we are doing here because they have other needs that are not satisfied, like a basic human needs? So I think that in my case, being a war survivor, my major agenda is to move a little bit away from that journal impact factor and to touch that human factor. Because I always think about what kind of legacy I will leave behind through all of this research that I have been doing and publications that I have been preparing, like whether there is any sort of legacy, whether anything will contribute to at least a little bit better society. So now, since we are closing, I would like to thank to LaEUMiDI. Thank you, Anka, Lisa, and Pablo very much for presenting the tremendous work that you have been doing. And I really hope that I will get a chance to be part of it, and that also we will have more collaboration with Division 48 and ABRIR. But I also like to thank to the audience, to all of you who dedicated this a little bit longer than an hour to this event. I would like all of you to join us, to join either Division 48 or ABRIR or LaEUMiDI or all of these. Like ABRIR doesn't take, I know that LaEUMiDI and ABRIR don't take any sort of membership fee. So like if you want to join us, just like send us an email, contact us. I do really hope that we will have the opportunity to meet again, to discuss these topics, maybe even at some point in person somewhere. And I do hope that at least some parts of what we were discussing today had an impact on you and your research agenda and maybe what you are doing in practice. And that we will have the opportunity at least to somehow help those that are in need. If you want to help our associations, you can do it either by joining us, providing your ideas, or at least like when you see we are sharing something on social networks, share it, spread word around. That is also help.
And I just want to thank you also, and just say one more time what you just said. What is our legacy, right? I think that should really be the driver of why we do more education, why we do more research, why we want to become whatever we want to become, right? Ultimately, is also what do we do for the world right here, right now. So what can I do more than just getting an education, or what can I do more than getting a publication? What can I do more than my academic career, right? Which sometimes, of course, it's important because it's also our livelihood, and early career researchers, of course, want to have a career, right? But I think that it's so important that ABRIR and LaEUMiDi and groups of people within the establishment, right? The people who don't have to fear for their job, for example, right? Open up these spaces where we can create a legacy, right? And where you can write the papers that don't need impact factor, but they will be so much more directly impacting the quality of life of somebody in a refugee camp, or somebody who is temporarily living in a school or a hotel right now. And I think that I really like the way you said it, Alma. It's what is your legacy? I think that should be a question we should always return to, and then find similar others, right? And here it seems like there's a meeting of tribes of thinking in the same thing. So I'm really delighted you brought us together. So I think on behalf of Lisa and Pablo, I also want to thank you, Alma, for your leadership, and thank everybody else who joined. And yes, let's meet, let's discuss, let's continue.
Yeah, and very, very much looking forward to this LaEUMiDi conference that will be by the end of this month. I think Pablo put all of these details in chat, so it's still time for you to join. And let's see what we can do together in the future. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a nice day and evening or morning, depending on where you are.